Don't take a bath first. Don't dirty this house's bath with your parasitic presence. Once again, I was reminded today that I am an outsider. No matter how much effort I put into housework, no matter how much I try to please my mother-in-law, I will always be a guest in this house. My mother-in-law, draped in an elegant silk gown, shot me an icy glare. Her eyes regarded me like an insect. Panicking, I pressed myself against the window in the hallway, trying to escape her view as much as possible. "I'm sorry," I muttered weakly, squeezing out words of apology, but even that only seemed to stoke her anger. Her meticulously shaped eyebrows furrowed in a V, and she threw an expensive bath towel onto the floor. How many times must I endure such cheap apologies? I reached out to pick up the towel from the floor, but it was a mistake. "Don't touch it! If your filthy hands touch this towel, it will lose all its value." Her cold words froze my heart. I realized once again that I had made an unforgivable mistake. "Honey, your mother..." I pleaded, my voice trembling, seeking help with desperate eyes. My husband deliberately avoided my gaze. "Think about Mom's feelings." He sighed without meeting my eyes. Once again, I had failed. Something essential for me to belong in this house must be fundamentally missing. 3 years into marriage, living in this house has become suffocating day by day. I stood in the corner of the hallway looking down at the floor. Every night I hear my mother-in-law gossiping about me. My husband's indecisive attitude only adds to the pain. I wonder why I endure this mistreatment. Maybe it's my own fault. If only I could meet my mother-in-law's expectations better. If only I could talk things through properly with my husband. It must be because I'm not trying hard enough that I can't change this situation. Just disappear already. You have no place in this house. Her words pierced me. In that instant, all the emotions I had suppressed for years began to surge. My throat felt raw and burning. And then, it happened. "Actually," I started to say, my voice trembling but firm. Tom and Heather's faces froze. Something had started. Something I could never take back. My name is Erica, 35 years old. I am the CEO of a jewelry brand called Erica James, which generates a monthly revenue of $25,000. However, only a few people know of this glamorous title, because to my family, I pretend to be a housewife, living modestly at home. The reason traces back 3 years ago, to something my husband said when we were getting married. We met 10 years ago when I was working as a jewelry designer for a brand. He was a finance staff member dispatched to our exhibition. His polite demeanor and reserved smile made him well regarded among the women at work. Among them, he paid attention to me. "Miss James, your designs are truly wonderful. My wife would love them." When he said that, my heart fluttered, not because of his kindness toward his wife, but because of his gentle voice and sincere eyes. After 6 months of dating, he proposed. "Would you build a happy home with me?" I'll never forget his earnest expression at that moment. I gladly accepted his proposal. But right after we decided to get married, he said something shocking. "My mother doesn't approve of women who aren't full-time housewives. If you want to keep working, we can call off the wedding." His voice was strained, and his face was filled with sorrow. I couldn't say anything in return. I understood his values and his fear of going against his family. I was torn. Should I give up my career or let go of the person I loved? Either choice felt like it would leave me with regret for the rest of my life. But looking into his sad eyes, I made a decision. I decided to pretend to quit my job and act like a full-time housewife while secretly continuing my passion. That's how I chose a life of concealing my true self for the sake of my husband. The first 6 months of our marriage were blissful. My mother-in-law was initially very kind. I'm so glad such a sweet daughter-in-law has joined our family. She taught me how to cook and clean. I felt a warmth in her guidance, almost like she was my own mother. You can always rely on me for anything. But her kindness didn't last forever. 3 months into the marriage, her demeanor began to change. At first, it was small corrections. "The tea is a bit too hot. You should clean in a more efficient direction." I thought she was just trying to be helpful, so I was even grateful. But soon, her advice turned into constant criticism. "Your laundry folding is sloppy. Do you even know how to do housework? This dish isn't cleaned properly. You can see it under the light." Every tiny mistake I made became an excuse for lectures. 10 times a day wasn't unusual. I turned to my husband for support. I hoped he would intervene. My mother is a perfectionist. She just notices those small details. That's all he said before burying himself in work again. I felt something crumble inside me that day. From then on, I often cried while doing housework. I pushed myself to meet her impossible standards, convinced that I was failing as a wife. One day, as I scrubbed dishes, I caught a glimpse of my hands. These hands had once been used to design jewelry. Now they were only used for cleaning and laundry. What a waste, I thought. Why am I living like this? Am I okay with giving up my life this way? The question cut through me like a blade, leaving no room for evasion. I decided I needed to reignite the passion I had buried. Without telling my husband, I made the decision to secretly start a jewelry business from home. Fortunately, pretending to have quit my job worked in my favor. No matter how much I tried to suppress my passion, it continued to burn inside me. That night, while Tom was away on a business trip, I spread out my sketchbook again. As I held the pen, my hand trembled. I had forgotten how much joy this brought me. This is my life. I'll reclaim it with these hands. I quietly but firmly resolved to step back into the world of jewelry. Little did I know this decision would trigger a storm of new challenges. One night, as I came home late from working on my designs, my husband was nowhere to be seen. At around 1 a.m., the front door swung open loudly. He stumbled in, drenched and reeking of alcohol. Normally calm and composed, he was barely able to stand. Alarmed and worried, I rushed to him. Are you okay? What happened? He didn't answer. Instead, he shakily pulled out crumpled papers from his bag and handed them to me. The moment I saw the words on those papers, my heart sank. $15,000. My husband had embezzled money from his company. My mind went blank as I clenched the papers and glared at him. What is this? My voice was sharp as I demanded an explanation. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He collapsed onto the floor and started sobbing uncontrollably. It's all my fault. Through his tears, he confessed everything. My boss harassed me relentlessly. They gave me impossible sales targets. I couldn't take it anymore, so I made a terrible mistake. Then I tried to fix it by gambling on casinos and forex trading, but the debt only grew. His words poured out like a broken dam, each sentence revealing a darker truth. He looked like a shattered doll, completely devoid of hope. Despite my fury and sense of betrayal, his pitiful state tugged at my heart. Why didn't you tell me sooner? We're supposed to be a team. My voice shook, but I forced myself to stay calm. Let's work on repaying this debt together. Hearing this, he grabbed my hands and fell to his knees, apologizing over and over. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. His tears seemed genuine, but my trust in him was already deeply fractured. That marked the beginning of a living hell. By day, I managed my growing jewelry business. By night, I took on extra freelance work to help repay the debt. Meanwhile, my husband, after losing his job, spent his days surfing the internet and playing games. At first, I told myself he needed time to recover. But as the days turned into weeks, seeing him idle while I worked tirelessly filled me with anger. Can't you do something more productive? Stop nagging me. I need a break too, don't I? His dismissive attitude only fueled my frustration. But in front of his mother, he transformed into a model son. Erica, is dinner ready? Have you cleaned the living room yet? That's my boy. A real man knows how to take charge. His act earned his mother's approval, while I silently endured the humiliation. Behind closed doors, he would kneel and apologize again. I'm the worst. I don't deserve you. These cycles of apology and complacency became our new normal. Over time, I came to understand the root of his behavior. His mother had molded him into this. Her obsession with him being a strong man and provider had stripped him of the ability to show vulnerability. Even now, as a jobless man buried in debt, he clung to the facade of being the family's pillar. Meanwhile, his mother's resentment toward me grew fiercer by the day. A wife's job is to maintain the household. That's your duty as a daughter-in-law. Her words stung, but I also glimpsed her own regrets behind them. I learned that she had once dreamed of becoming a jewelry designer. However, her father had forced her to give up that dream, insisting that a woman's place was in the home. Her life had been dedicated to being a perfect housewife, even caring for her in-laws for 7 years. My success in jewelry design was a constant reminder of what she has sacrificed. Her envy and regret manifested as hostility toward me. She saw me not only as an intruder, but as a symbol of the life she could never have. Trapped between her expectations and my husband's weakness, I felt increasingly suffocated. One morning, my sister-in-law Naomi walked into the kitchen with her phone in hand. "Look at this necklace. It's trending on Instagram. Isn't it stunning?" She showed the screen to my mother-in-law, who peered at it curiously. "Oh, it's lovely. Whoever designed it must be truly talented." My heart stirred at her praise. Ironically, the piece she admired was from my own brand, Erica. The model wearing the necklace exuded elegance, and the design sparkled in the photo. But let's be honest, only rich people can afford this kind of thing. Women like Erica would never have the chance to own something like this. Her casual comment cut deeper than I expected. I stood there silently, feeling a dull ache in my chest. I excused myself and went to the room, closing the door behind me. As soon as I sat on the bed, my legs gave out, and I collapsed. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, tired, drained, and unrecognizable. My once bright eyes now seemed clouded with exhaustion and despair. Why am I living like this? I once loved my husband deeply, and part of me still did. I had sacrificed my career, my identity, and my dreams for this family. But what had I gained in return? My mother-in-law called me a parasite. My husband averted his eyes whenever I needed support. Was he always like this? Or did I blind myself thinking he would change? I earn over $20,000 a month, enough to pay off his $15,000 debt. Yet I'm treated as a burden. The weight of their accusations made it hard to breathe. Looking down at my trembling hands, I realized something. This cannot continue. But the energy to stand up and fight wasn't there. I remained in my room paralyzed by a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and helplessness. That night, as I finished washing the dishes, I decided to use the bath first. "Excuse me, but may I go first?" I asked politely, sensing my mother-in-law's piercing gaze on my back. "A parasite like you thinks you can go first?" Her words were sharp and loud, cutting through the silence like a knife. My husband, sitting at the table, froze, his fork hovering midair. As usual, he said nothing. My heart sank, and I felt something inside me break. Enough is enough. Taking a deep breath, I turned to face her. "Fine. This parasite will leave." My voice was calm, almost detached, yet it seemed to slice through the air. Heather's eyes widened in shock, and my husband gaped at me, speechless. Without waiting for a response, I went to my room and started packing. As I folded clothes into my suitcase, my hands trembled, not from fear, but from a mix of anger and resolve. Suddenly, the door burst open. "Erica, wait!" He stood there, tears in his eyes, begging for forgiveness. "Don't listen to her. I'm so sorry." His pleas brought back memories of his repeated apologies and empty promises. "You always chose your mother over me. This time is no different." My voice was cold, final. He looked down, unable to refute my words. I zipped up my suitcase and walked toward the front door. My mother-in-law blocked my path, her arms crossed and her expression defiant. "If you're leaving, leave." Her voice was sharp, filled with a misplaced sense of triumph. Without a word, I pulled out my phone and showed her the sales figures from my jewelry brand. "My company earns $25,000 a month." Her face turned pale as she stared at the numbers. I continued, my voice steady and cold. "Oh, and by the way, your son is unemployed and owes $15,000. I won't be paying the remaining $10,000. My husband collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. "Oh, this can't be true. This can't be happening." His voice broke as he mumbled to himself, tears streaming down his face. Heather, usually so composed, now looked completely defeated. Her lips quivered as she whispered, How could this be?" I didn't wait for an explanation or an apology. I opened the door and stepped outside, feeling the cool night air against my face. Behind me, I could hear my husband's desperate cries. "Erica, please, don't go." Heather's voice soon followed, laced with panic and disbelief. "This isn't real. It's a lie." But their voices sounded distant, like echoes from another world. The weight I had carried for years was finally lifting. The wind felt cleansing, as if it were washing away the pain and resentment. With every step, the ties that bound me to that house unraveled. For the first time in years, I felt free. The next morning, I woke up in a small hotel room, my suitcase by the door. As I stared at the ceiling, I thought about everything I had endured. My sacrifices, my compromises, and my silence. All for a family that had never valued me. But now that chapter was over. I had regained my life. It was time to focus on my dreams and my future. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my work. My jewelry brand, Erica, became my sole focus. The store I had been dreaming of was finally nearing completion. Standing in the construction site, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was my second chance, a chance to live on my own terms. However, peace didn't last long. A few weeks later, I received a call from the hospital. "Mrs. James, your husband was in a car accident." My heart sank as the words echoed in my mind. I rushed to the hospital, fear and uncertainty gripping me. When I arrived, the doctor explained his condition. "He's in critical condition, but stable for now." Stepping into the room, I saw him lying there, his body bruised and broken. For a moment, the anger I had felt toward him dissolved, replaced by sorrow and pity. I stood by his bedside, looking at the man I had once loved. Despite everything, I didn't want him to die. As I stood there, I felt a strange mix of emotions: grief, regret, and a faint glimmer of hope. It was then that my mother-in-law burst into the room, her face contorted with anger. "This is all your fault." Her accusations echoed through the room, shocking the nurses and visitors outside. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her voice shrill and accusing. "You ruined this family. You drove my son to this." I clenched my fists, struggling to remain calm. Just as I was about to respond, the door opened again. "Mrs. James, we need to speak with you." The officers carried evidence that would change everything. "We have footage of the accident. Please, take a look." The video showed Heather intentionally driving her car into her son's bicycle. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the scene unfold. It was no accident. Heather turned pale as the officers confronted her. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for attempted murder." She stammered, denying everything, but the evidence was undeniable. The woman who had terrorized me for years was finally being held accountable. As she was led away in handcuffs, her cries echoed down the hospital hallway. Her screams faded as the officers escorted her out. I stood frozen in place, trying to process everything that had just happened. My husband, unconscious and broken in the hospital bed. His mother arrested for trying to take his life. It felt surreal, as if I were watching someone else's life fall apart. But deep down, I knew this was the inevitable result of years of unresolved dysfunction. A few days later, my husband regained consciousness. When I entered his room, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Erica, I'm so sorry." His voice was weak, filled with regret. "I should have protected you. I should have stood up to her. Instead, I let her ruin everything. Our marriage, our lives." I didn't respond immediately. The anger and pain I had carried for so long now felt distant. Instead, I felt a quiet sense of finality. He reached for the drawer inside his bed and pulled out a document. "I've already signed the divorce papers. It's the least I can do for you, to let you live your life without any more of this." Tears welled up in his eyes as he handed me the papers. "Thank you for everything." I took the papers from him, my hands trembling slightly. For the first time in years, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was closure. I didn't hate him anymore, but I also knew I could never return to the life we had before. I quietly nodded and turned to leave the room. As I walked down the hospital corridor, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The life I had fought so hard to save was finally behind me. A few months later, the legal battles ended. Heather was sentenced to 5 years in prison for attempted murder. They were also ordered to pay a significant amount in damages, which left their family in financial ruin. My ex-husband started working in a modest job and began repaying the debt he owed me, little by little. Meanwhile, I focused entirely on my jewelry business. Erica Jewelry thrived, expanding to multiple storefronts and gaining international recognition. My story became an inspiration to many, and I was frequently invited to speak about my journey. Looking back, those years of pain and struggle shaped who I am today. I am stronger, wiser, and finally living a life that is mine alone. The past no longer haunts me. It only reminds me of how far I've come. As I stood outside my flagship store in New York, watching customers browse my designs, I felt at peace. This was my dream, a life of independence, creativity, and purpose. And I had achieved it on my own terms.